Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is your host, Blaine Burgess, and we have episode 57. This episode is called The Red Wedding. It's a little bit ironic because 57 is the number on Heinz ketchup bottles. I only know this because as a kid I was obsessed with ketchup and apple juice and all things hella sweet. But yeah, Red Wedding. As you can imagine, we're getting into a little bit of Game of Thrones today. But first and foremost, this episode is very late. And for good reason. So last week, not only was second week of the new trimester, still kind of getting up to speed on some things, also was the my week to taper off of my weightlifting training in preparation for the Pan American Masters Weightlifting Championships. This event, in my experience, is my first international event, my first Masters event in weightlifting. I turned 35 in November, and it's a very well-run event, and I put on, very officially. But I gather, since the Masters Weightlifting and USA Weightlifting have kind of split, that the participation hasn't been as wide. And quick history, the two organizations split. USA Weightlifting still puts on Masters events separately, and Masters Weightlifting is the only way you can qualify for the World Championships and Masters. So you have on one side kind of like an empire type deal where people are you kind of have to go with them, but you can't qualify for Worlds. And then you have people that are trying to qualify for the World Championships doing the Pan American Championships. But anyways, I digress. With a relatively low total for me, without much competition in my weight class, 110 kilo, 242 pound weight class, 35 and up, like 35 to 39, I believe, age group. I was able to win the Pan American Masters Championship. And again, it wasn't my best effort. I didn't need my best effort to win. It felt a little bit cheap, because I know there are people who were not there because of the split between Masters and USA Weightlifting. But regardless, it was a goal of mine, and I did hit it. So, very happy, very grateful on that. But I was also trying to make weight, and thankfully been walking around about 113 kilos. It's like 6.5 pounds over what I needed to be, and got to Baton Rouge, took a nice hot bath, Epsom salts and everything. It kind of pulls the moisture out of your body. You sweat a lot, and by relaxing and sweating, I made weight, was able to lift, had fun. I think it was episode 7 of the podcast. Tim Rawlings was my guest. I got to lift with Tim, one of my good friends. So overall, great weekend in Baton Rouge. I did drive 6 hours there Saturday and drive 6 hours back late last night. So I'm a little sleepy, which is probably why I'm rambling. We're 4 minutes in and I'm still talking about Masters Pan American weightlifting. Pretty boring for you non-weightlifters, but I'm going to hold you hostage and talk about it. I'm just kidding. It's over. So yeah, today going back to school was a little bit rough. I was able to meet all of my obligations, everything I'm supposed to be doing. I have one more today, and then I'll be able to relax before another big day tomorrow. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about next couple episodes of the podcast, where I want to go with it. And there's just a concept for my book I keep coming back to. It's related to Game of Thrones. And I've been meditating a lot on the Stark family. For those of you who know me, I do have the Stark sigil tattooed on my chest with the fake language from Game of Thrones. It says Vala Dorharis, meaning all men must serve. I got the tattoo for Jon Snow, who is in the show, bastard son of the Warden of the North. So very first episode, there's a defector from what is effectively a prison camp. It's a bunch of criminals. They, instead of going to just jail, they get sentenced to basically guard a giant ice wall from the occult things that live beyond the wall. They're not entirely certain that they exist, but they're all convinced that they do, in a way. And there's a defector. So this guy leaves the wall, comes south, and I don't remember exactly why. I think he was just scared of something. But basically, they catch him, and then this guy, Ned Stark, as they call him, Eddard. I don't know why they call him Ned. But he catches him, and then he teaches his sons. Basically, if you sentence someone to die, you swing the sword. And it's a good lesson. There are consequences in life. Things that have happened to me recently just made me realize that in my life, I do have a lot of love in my heart. And I do let the people I love off the hook sometimes. And in doing so, it may seem loving, but in the long run, it's actually not loving. If you don't hold them accountable in a loving setting, they'll go out in the world, and people that don't give a shit about them will hold them accountable, and they'll be surprised. They'll be very kind of taken aback. So it's possible to hold someone accountable in a loving way. AKA, if they do something, even though you might not want to, you do need to hold them accountable for them. It's in their best interest to do so. Consequences that might seem negative can have very positive, lasting effects in terms of someone's life. And I think part of growing up, especially for men, especially for leaders of any gender, is just understanding when to levy consequences, kind of come down hard with that tough love and an iron fist, and when to, kind of pull some aside and show them, grace and forgiveness and love. And I think you can actually do both, consequences and forgiveness, in a really graceful way. But anyways, first episode of Game of Thrones, they put a guy to the sword for deserting, and that's the rule. What's interesting, though, the White Walkers, the frozen people north of the wall that he was afraid of, were real. And so the guy got put to death for being afraid of something that he really should have been afraid of, and they end up fighting pretty much the entire show. So it just goes to show, the guy shouldn't have deserted, but also he was right. Maybe we should look at the rule for deserters from the wall. Maybe we could just send them back to the wall, and have them confined at the wall. I don't know. But that starts, for me, kind of a meditation on the Stark family at large, everything that happens. And so early on, Ned Stark kind of gets your respect for kind of serving consequences as expected. Something that's tough, putting someone to death. He didn't flinch. He said, listen, this is how it is. We're going to do it. And so you kind of respect him for that. And you can tell he's a strong leader. He's got a good family. But throughout the course of the show, if you look at what happens at the end, you realize this guy, who's respectable on the surface, has some giant character flaws that cause his death and the death of many of his family members. And he learned the hard way. Their whole family learned genuinely the hard way. And when it came down to the most important decision of the whole series, someone that he mentored, Jon Snow, I now, with different life perspective, kind of understand Jon Snow also dropped the ball. So here goes nothing. Shortly after Ned Stark puts the guy to the sword, his best friend is the king. He helped his best friend take over the throne from a person who was insane, inbred, and had dragons. Would like burn people alive with the dragons. So like pretty fair, right? Like as much as the guy deserted the wall and got put to death, he committed treason against the kingdom and took over the throne, which is also punishable by death. But because he is who he is, he's a nobleman, and they were saving people, ultimately his life was spared. Or was it? So his best friend comes and visits him in the north, and his basically advisor had just been killed, and he asks his friend Ned, hey, will you come be my advisor? And here is the first mistake. It's not good for the show because the script would be boring, but what you should have seen was, hey man, I have a lot of responsibilities as Warden of the North. I understand the position you're in, but the South is no place for me. I'm a Northman. Let's me and you brainstorm who it should be. Let's find someone strong for you to support you that we both trust. Instead, he just agrees kind of blindly, goes south with his friend. His friend is a drunk who's completely out of control, married to a manipulative woman from a manipulative family, a very rich family, who wants the throne and is secretly plotting to dethrone him, which they do. And they also, his kids are not his kids. His kids are inbred. His wife's brother fathered them. So you can see what's happening. This guy's getting manipulated. He's drunk. He's kind of almost no better than the guy they ousted to get the throne in the first place. And instead of being very direct and stern with his friend, the way he was stern with the deserter from the wall, he kind of sat back and let his friend do what he wanted to do, which led ultimately to his death. His friend gets shot in a hunting accident, quote unquote, but it wasn't an accident. They had him killed. It was staged. So the king dies, and his inbred, not his son, becomes king. And Ned finds out. All of a sudden, he's like, hey, now that my friend, the king, is gone, I'm going to start stepping up. So it's a little bit too late. Tries to out the inbred kid as not the real king. And what's ironic about this is the whole time Ned Stark knows that Jon Snow is the rightful king. Because Jon Snow is not his bastard son, as they tell you originally early on. He's the genuine son of his sister, and she had a kid with the son of the king that was deposed. So I know if you don't watch Game of Thrones, this is all probably way too crazy, but all I'm trying to say is this guy has in his back pocket a legitimate king, and instead gets into a squabble with people who can't be squabbled with, who can't be beaten on that playing field. And the one guy who is dangerous to his sister's son is now dead. Instead of backing this kid up and saying who he really is to the world, he again tries to squabble, and in that squabble gets killed by the inbred boy king. and leaves his family open to all kinds of horrors. Basically, his family hops into war with the new king, who has basically unlimited resources and the throne, and their struggle leads them to make several bad decisions about allying with different people, and this is where the Red Wedding comes into play. So the Red Wedding was where most of the Stark family was in a castle of a lord whose daughter was going to marry Ned's oldest son. Ned's oldest son had already secretly married basically a nurse from the war who was from foreign land, like didn't have name or title, it wasn't royalty, and this other lord knew it. So this woman was at the wedding and she was pregnant, and basically the enemies, the king, the boy king, and all their allies snuck into the wedding and killed the whole Stark family. So now Ned Stark and most of his family are all dead. His young children are terrorized by people, go through some awful, awful shit, which in the end makes them way better. But once again, very awful to watch them go through it. Who they become in the end is pretty cool, but it didn't have to be that way, long story short. And this whole time, Jon Snow actually got sent to the Wall for being a bastard, even though he's the rightful heir to the throne of the Seven Kingdoms. So this kid goes to the Wall. He eventually becomes the Lord Protector of the Night's Watch that watches over this wall. And he has a mutiny. All of the people kill him. So now he's dead. And then there's a magic priestess that brings him back to life. And so now he's alive again. And because he died, he can technically get out of the Night's Watch because he gave his life. And has all the defectors hanged, the ones that killed him. And then he leaves and goes south. He meets his aunt, the Dragon Queen. They sleep together. Some more incest, because that's like what their family does apparently. They kind of know it without even knowing who he was. They just knew, like, hey, this feels right. And so then the Dragon Queen enters the war. The boy king dies. His mother kind of acts as the queen regent. His siblings, younger siblings, become the king. There's a whole lot of mess that happens. I'm not really concerned with, because eventually what happens is the Dragon Queen struggles and burns the capital and does all this awful, awful shit that she kind of said she would never do. And Jon Snow is in love with her, his aunt, by the way. And at a certain point, he learns the truth about who he is. And it's, of course, dangerous for him to be who he is, because the Dragon Queen has now won her campaign, and all of her expectations and everything are set. She has the throne. And she got it using tactics that were less than, I think what she originally set out to be. She didn't want to burn her subjects and basically burn down the capital. So she kind of loses her mind. So here's where I bring it back to that first episode. Just like Ned Stark had a chance at one point to pull out Jon Snow and say, hey, this is Aegon Targaryen, son of my sister, and he's the rightful heir to the throne, and I think everyone would have agreed and probably just let him be king back then and could have avoided the whole war thing. Instead, now the Dragon Queen has the throne, and she's terrorizing people, becoming the very dictator she promised not to be. Basically, her grandfather, I believe, her father or grandfather, can't remember, who was deposed, the Mad King. She is now the Mad Queen, essentially. And so the whole story, that everyone fought so hard, and they're just right back where they were. And at any point, Ned Stark or Jon Snow, these Stark people, could come through and just take charge. Like, all anyone wants is somebody to take charge. Sometimes even if it's the wrong person, people are cool with it. And for the longest time, I didn't understand why people didn't like the ending of Game of Thrones. I personally, just like you go from the Mad King to having the Mad Queen, and it's this big circle and nothing really changes, I felt like for a long time that was very true about life. I was very nihilistic. No matter how much we struggle in life, we do all these great things. You kind of are born in diapers, and then you end life in diapers. And that's kind of the cycle of life. And in between, you have this great adventure. And that's really what life's all about, is the adventure. But what I realize now, just with some additional life experience, is really the missed opportunity, and why people can say all kinds of reasons why they didn't like the ending to Game of Thrones. But I think I know the reason why. Because once again, just like Ned Stark, and the death of Ned Stark was like a huge surprise to people, and they were up in arms about it. It was controversial. Jon Snow had a chance to take responsibility, to step up and be exactly who he was supposed to be, as was his birthright. And as hard as it would have been to go toe-to-toe with the Dragon Queen, he's the only person that could do it and keep her alive, because he had also had a dragon. He could also take control of her dragon, convince the dragon that he was the one. And what's interesting is, in one of the final episodes, the dragon is keeping her safe in the throne room. And he walks up, and the dragon kind of menaces him. And Jon Snow gets him to back down, because he's also of that family, and can kind of make the dragons obey. I thought it's really interesting, instead of going into the throne room, trying to talk her down, and then killing her when she doesn't agree, he could have taken the dragon and made her submit. And he is the only one that could ride that dragon and get the dragon to sway, and he was technically the oldest son of her older brother. And in the line of how the Game of Thrones works, like, he's the guy. She would only be the girl if he didn't exist. So he had an opportunity to keep her alive and to help change her heart. Even though she had done all that awful shit, she deserved a chance to be redeemed. And I think that's partially what people like to see. Like, everyone likes a good redemption story. They like a fall and then a redemption. But they genuinely just want to see someone take responsibility. And the fact that he just kills her and goes back to the wall. So he starts off the series going to the wall, and he ends at the wall, just like, the cycle of the throne continued. It just shows that, in my opinion, I think both things are true. I think the cycles of life, they happen repeatedly, but the reason they happen repeatedly is because, the universe or God or whatever you believe in is trying to get us to that point where the best of us is in a position to make a different choice, and then they do it. And it's happened in history, and then we've also regressed at times. So humanity is evolving, but it evolves ever so slowly, because the best of us fails to make the right choice, fails to make a different choice, fails to show forgiveness and grace. And I don't think that the Dragon Queen had to die. I used to think that it was kind of beautiful in a way, because, like his adopted father told him, if you pass the sentence, you swing the sword. And so he did what his basically what his uncle told him to do, because his uncle's sister was his mom. But you saw where that got Ned Stark. He's dead. He got his head cut off. And then Jon was back at the wall. And while it may be true that his younger brother, who took over as king, would be, well, technically his cousin, but was ultimately the best choice. For other reasons, that's a whole other episode. He also could have been his advisor, his hand, so he could have stepped up and been the king and saved the Dragon Queen and helped her be redeemed, take the mantle of king, use his brother or his cousin who ended up being king as an advisor, and the kingdom would have been way better off for having both of those leaders. And eventually maybe the Dragon Queen could come back and be a leader once she was redeemed. So I guess that's all I'm saying is, like, cooperation. Like, not just cooperation, like genuine cooperation, giving up of selfish motives. It's way easier to kill the Dragon Queen than it would be to go through the pain of having to betray her and then look her in the eye again. It would be basically every time they saw each other, he'd have to live it again, rather than just living it once and having it be over. So in a way, a little bit of a coward's way out. And now I have a tattoo for Jon Snow on my chest. That's a little bit contradictory. And that's kind of how it goes, I think, with tattoos sometimes. You get them and you're jazzed about them, and then you realize what it actually means. But with all that said, I'm very happy that I've come to the conclusions that I have, because ultimately that's going to make all the difference in my life when I get to that decision where I can take the easy way out, or I can maybe try to redeem someone and forgive them and help them grow. Maybe I'll be able to be the bigger man, turn the other cheek, find the strength to love someone who doesn't deserve it, but ultimately does, because all human beings do. So, chew on that. Until next time, this is Blaine, out.